Solomon Dryden wasn't he looking for attention. He didn't he expect anyone to notice him when he parked behind Elm Ridge High School. The building looked like any other small-town Texas school, faded red brick, fluttering flags, a group of teenagers loitering near the gym entrance. The parking lot was already packed. Families in dress shirts and sundresses filtered toward the gym, kids clutching balloons and homemade signs, and an elderly woman using a walker struggled over a curb. Solomon guided his black Dodge Charger into a tight space near the fence, turned off the engine, and stepped out. He adjusted his dark blue marine dress uniform with practiced precision. His boots were shined to perfection, not for vanity, but because he only knew how to do things with care. It wasn't just a habit. It was a principle. He'd driven all the way from Temple, an 8-hour trip, to be there. Flying would be been easier, sure, but the Charger had been his wife's favorite. She'd passed away 2 years earlier, and somehow the long drive made her feel closer. The hum of the road gave him time to think, to remember. Solomon leaned back into the car and retrieved a worn photo from the glove box, a picture of his wife cradling their newborn son, Tyron. The edges were frayed, the image faded by time. He stared at it for a moment, then tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. "I told you," he murmured under his breath. "I wouldn't miss this." His walk to the entrance was slow, deliberate. Not because of age or pain, but because every step meant something. His broad frame and upright posture stood out in the crowd. His face was calm, composed, but carried the quiet gravity of someone who had weathered storms few could name. Inside, the gym buzzed with chaotic joy. Rows of metal chairs packed the floor. Bleachers creaked under the weight of cheering relatives. The air held the smell of floor polish and concession snacks. This was a moment families lived for. At the door, a volunteer in a headset checked tickets. Solomon handed over his printout. The man gave it a cursory glance, nodded, and pointed ahead. "Third row on the left. Reserved for families." "Thanks," Solomon said, his voice smooth and deep. As he made his way toward the front, he noticed a few heads turning. Some gave him a once-over, registering the uniform. Most looked away, pretending they hadn't noticed. One woman offered a polite smile before whispering to her seatmate. Solomon didn't flinch. He'd been tall, black, and wearing a military uniform for long enough to know what kinds of looks meant what. He found his seat, a flimsy plastic chair, slightly uneven, and adjusted it without complaint. In front of him, the stage was decorated with silver banners. "Class of 2024" glittered against the far wall. School board members shuffled their papers by the podium. Solomon sat quietly, shoulders back, eyes scanning the gym as students filed in wearing caps and gowns. He wasn't there for attention, he was there for his son. And nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to stop him from watching Tyron cross that stage. But as fate would have it, someone was about to try. Up near the front of the gym, Solomon spotted Tyron among the seated graduates, tall, a little gangly, and unmistakably his mother's son. 18 years gone in what felt like a blink. Solomon remembered holding that boy the night he came into the world. He'd flown in from Okinawa on a 4-day pass, still in his camis, dirt under his nails from the flight line. And now here they were, time condensed into a surreal full circle. He sat motionless, barely blinking, holding onto the moment as if it might slip away. Behind him, people continued to fill the space, chairs scraping the gym floor, programs rustling, loud laughs echoing, a man muttering after spilling his coffee. But none of it reached Solomon. His focus was locked on the stage, the rows of eager young faces, and the photo of his wife tucked safely in his jacket. Then the band struck up Pomp and Circumstance. The crowd rose in unison, applause scattered like rain. Some students looked nervous, others beamed with pride. Solomon stood slowly, shoulders squared, hands by his sides. The national anthem followed, and while most placed their hands over their hearts, Solomon remained still, his very posture a salute in itself. He thought of his wife again. She'd be in tears from the first note to the last, adjusting Tyron's tie for the fourth time before letting him out the door. He stared forward, steady. But as the anthem's final notes echoed off the gym walls, two men began making their way down the side aisle. Solomon clocked them instantly. They wore matching uniforms, black polos tucked into tactical cargo pants, earpieces in, radios clipped to their belts. Security, not police. Their badges read Harlan Security Services. One was shorter, stocky, and stone-faced with a shaved head. The other was lankier, distractedly chewing gum like he was killing time. Neither looked a day over 30. Solomon didn't shift. Stillness, he had learned, often held more authority than motion. He kept his eyes forward, palms resting calmly on his thighs. The shorter guard leaned in just enough to be heard. "Sir," he said quietly, "we're gonna need you to step out with us." Solomon slowly turned to look at him. "Is there an issue?" The taller guard took a step closer. "This section is reserved for graduates' families." Solomon reached into his coat and pulled out his ticket, crisp, printed, official. "This is my seat. Third row. Confirmed family seating." The short guard didn't even glance at it. "We were told the section's full." Solomon remained still. "It was full when I sat down too." "Who told you to remove me?" The taller guard shifted on his feet, visibly unsettled by the calm confidence. "Look, sir. No need to make this into something it's not. There's space in the back." Solomon's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but clarity. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son graduate. I'm staying right here." A few nearby heads turned. One woman leaned toward her husband, whispering while eyeing the unfolding tension. Up in the bleachers, someone subtly angled their phone, recording. The short guard straightened and glanced around. "Sir, I'll ask one more time." "You can ask all you want," Solomon said, his voice firmer now. "But I'm not leaving." The taller one exhaled sharply, sucking his teeth. "You'd probably feel more comfortable in the back. That's all we're saying." There it was. Solomon turned to him fully now, really looked at him. That phrase, "more comfortable," wasn't about convenience or logistics. It came from somewhere deeper. He'd heard it his entire life. On porches, in break rooms, in waiting areas, and yes, even on military bases. Polished, polite, wrapped in just enough civility to deny its sting. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The air in the room changed. Tension started to hum beneath the surface. People could feel it even if they didn't know why yet. A quiet line had been crossed. The short guard noticed it too. He adjusted the radio on his hip and spoke into it, low and clipped, without looking away from Solomon. Still seated, Solomon didn't blink. His message was clear, the conversation was over. A woman beside him, white-haired and soft-spoken, leaned slightly his way. "Don't you dare move," she whispered. Solomon gave a subtle nod, acknowledgement without words. He wasn't trying to escalate. He was just trying to see his son walk across that stage. Like any other father. But the guards weren't finished. The tall one leaned in again. "If you've got a complaint," he said, "take it to the school office. We're just following directions." Solomon turned his head again, calm and unhurried. "You got a name, son?" The guard blinked, caught off guard by the question. "It's Officer Malley." "Not officer," Solomon replied quietly. "You're private security." That made the second guard step in. "Okay, that's enough. If you're not going to move." He never finished. At that exact moment, the gym's main doors creaked open at the far end. 6 men entered, not in uniform, no identification, no fanfare. But everything about them, how they walked, How they held themselves said they weren't here by accident. They didn't come in together, but anyone paying attention would notice they shared the same silent rhythm, the same still intensity. They took up separate positions across the gym. Spread out. Casual but intentional. They looked like everyday men to most. But not to Solomon. He didn't have to turn around. He already knew. Every breath, every glance, they moved like brothers in arms. The guards hadn't noticed. Not yet. But they would. Solomon kept his eyes forward, focused on the stage. His face didn't change, but something inside him did. Something deep. A setting he didn't switch on often, unless the moment demanded it, calm under pressure. Centered in chaos. The guards lingered, circling him now, not with purpose, but posture. Not enforcing safety, enforcing ego. They were trying to remind him who had control. But they didn't understand. Solomon had been places where control meant survival. Where posture didn't matter, only purpose. A name was called on stage. A light applause followed. But most of the eyes nearby weren't watching the stage anymore. They were watching the quiet storm unfolding in row 3. Officer Malley shifted again. Nervous now. He leaned in. "I'm trying to help you here," he said, voice lower, almost pleading. "Let us not turn this into something it doesn't have to be." Solomon glanced up at him, steady as ever. "You're not in a position to offer that kind of help." Malley hesitated. The confidence he walked in with was wearing thin. The shorter one, whose name tag read Garvin, wasn't as patient. He hated being challenged. His fingers drifted toward the radio clip to his side. A few rows back, a man rose to his feet. Quiet. No one noticed right away. He didn't speak. Just stood there, arms crossed, gaze locked ahead. Built like a wall, eyes like razors. He eased into a seat at the aisle, his stare never leaving the scene. Then, another man stood from the opposite side of the gym. Same quiet strength. Same posture. Intentional. Steady. And then another. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Solomon hadn't turned once. He didn't have to. He knew every one of them by silhouette, by stance, by the silence they commanded. He had led these men through fire, through dirt, through places too dark for most to name. He didn't need to confirm what he already knew in his bones. Garvin leaned in again, this time his voice sharp with frustration. "Listen, man, you're causing a situation." Solomon turned his head slowly, deliberately. "And you're not listening." Garvin's hand twitched toward his radio. But before he could press the button, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Is there a reason this man is being harassed?" The gym quieted. The voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was precise. Calm. Heavy with weight. The kind of voice people stop to listen to because it doesn't rise to demand attention, it drops low enough to demand respect. A man stood in the center aisle. Tall, weathered, with a salt and pepper beard and a tailored black coat over a gray shirt. Creed Marston. Solomon had pulled him out of a collapsed vehicle in Kandahar, dragging him over open ground while the sky poured lead. Garvin turned to him, blinking. "Who are you?" Creed didn't answer. He took one step forward. "I asked you a question." Malley raised a hand as if to defuse things. "Sir, everything's under control." "No," Creed said, his voice suddenly sharper. "It isn't." From the far bleachers, another man stood. Then another. 4 now. Eyes locked. Calm. Ready. Solomon didn't move. The entire left half of the gym was watching openly. A boy pointed. A teacher tried to refocus attention on the stage, waving his arms, but no one was looking at diplomas anymore. Creed stepped forward again. You're making fools of yourselves. And you're about one breath away from crossing a line you can't uncross. Garvin looked at Mally. The uncertainty in their eyes was unmistakable now. They had walked into a moment they didn't understand, and they were outnumbered in every way that mattered. Creed's voice didn't waver. I don't care what someone told you. You do not lay hands on this man. You do not tell him to leave. And you sure as hell don't ask again. The stillness in the gym was thick now, not from fear, but something heavier. Respect. Warning. Resolve. A quiet kind of respect had begun to bloom, one that spread slowly, as more people started to grasp the weight of what they were witnessing. Solomon finally lifted his gaze and looked at Creed. The nod he gave wasn't gratitude. It wasn't submission. It was recognition, two men acknowledging a truth only they understood. Creed's eyes softened, just for a second. Then he eased back into his seat, arms crossed, but the weight in the air didn't lift. Not yet. Those watching were waiting, holding their breath, wondering what the guards would do next. Solomon didn't see the banners, the stage, or the crowd anymore. His body remained still, but his mind was pulled backward 15 years into the past. Afghanistan. Late afternoon in Kandahar province, where the sun didn't set gently, it slammed into the earth, turning the sand into fire and the sky into a sheet of steel. Back then, Solomon had been a gunnery sergeant. He had just wrapped up a routine briefing when everything went wrong. An IED tore through the convoy, flipping the lead vehicle like it was made of cardboard. Dust, metal, and body parts rained down in a wave of chaos. Then came the gunfire, tight, deliberate, not random. It was an ambush. Solomon didn't panic. He ducked behind the shell of a broken door, scanning through smoke and shouting. 6 of his men were down, pinned near the burning husk of a second transport. One of them was already dragging another soldier, his leg leaving a bloody trail in the dirt. That was Creed Young, new in country, and already shot in the leg. Solomon didn't hesitate. No radio call. No permission. He sprinted through open ground, weaving through bullets and broken glass, and slid behind a charred axle beside Creed. Creed looked up, his face streaked with blood. You're hit, he gasped. You think, Solomon said, grabbing hold of the downed soldier with him, Private Enrique Soto. Creed pushed from behind, teeth gritted. Where's Divas? Solomon yelled. Creed pointed weakly. Left. Under the hood. Solomon turned and saw him, Divas, a Navy SEAL, pinned beneath what remained of the engine block. His voice was hoarse, calling for help but unable to move. Solomon didn't hesitate. Stay low. Move when I do, he told Creed. Creed nodded, and that was when he first understood what real leadership looked like. Solomon crossed the dirt again. His boot hit bone, then gravel, but he didn't slow down. He dropped beside Divas, pressed low, and locked both hands under the wreckage. Gunny, don't, Divas choked out. I'm fine. Just go. You're not staying here, Solomon growled. With one leg braced and his back screaming, Solomon lifted. The metal shrieked under the strain, but it shifted just enough. Divas kicked his leg free and fell into Solomon's arms. Together, they scrambled back toward cover. Gunfire still cracked overhead. Creed limped in with Soto. Behind him came Horton and Lim, covered in ash, eyes wide but weapons steady. When the shooting finally stopped, there was no cheer. No speech. Just silence and 6 men still breathing. Solomon stayed last, eyes on the horizon, making sure the worst had truly passed before medevac arrived. He hadn't spoken much that night. He didn't need to. The memory etched itself into everyone's bones. From that day on, if Solomon ever asked for something anywhere, anytime, there was no question. They'd come. Back in the gym, Creed stayed silent in his seat, eyes locked on the guards still hovering by Solomon's row. He wasn't thinking about gunfire or rescue anymore. He was thinking about obligation. About how the man who once saved his life was now being humiliated just for sitting in the wrong seat at a high school graduation. His jaw tightened. Then, another man walked in quietly and took a seat 4 rows back. It was Meeks, another SEAL from those same years. Minutes later, Zachary Wells found a spot near the right side bleachers. Neither said a word. They didn't have to. Solomon's gaze drifted to the back of the gym, catching Meeks' eyes. No nod. No signal. Just awareness. And that was enough. The guards still didn't understand what those glances meant. Not yet. But when they made their next move, they learned the hard way. The ceremony trudged on in the background. Names echoed from the speakers, hands clapped here and there, some louder than necessary, as if trying to bury the weight that had settled over the room. But the focus had shifted. People weren't watching the stage anymore. They were watching the 3rd row, left side. Where Solomon Drayton sat like stone. And where 2 security guards stood like they had no idea what was coming. Garvin glanced nervously toward. Near the front, a school staff member tried to catch Garvin's attention, her expression tense, eyes flicking between him and Solomon. She mouthed something, gesturing subtly, perhaps asking him to de-escalate. But Garvin shook his head. He wasn't backing down. He started something, and his pride wasn't about to let it go. Mally shifted his stance again, chewing harder on his gum. He looked uneasy now, like even he wasn't sure where this was headed. But he didn't move either. "Sir," Garvin said, louder this time. "This is your final warning." Solomon didn't react. To do what, exactly? Garvin stepped in even closer, close enough that his duty belt brushed Solomon's knee. His voice dropped. "To stop causing a disruption. We don't want any issues. Just move to the back." Solomon turned his head slowly, locking eyes with him. "You're the only one making this a problem." Garvin's face tightened. Then came the slip. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everyone else? This isn't some military base, it's a high school." The words hit harder than he realized. The crowd around them fell into a hush. A little girl in the next row stopped fidgeting. A man with a camcorder froze mid-zoom. Even Mally seemed to falter, shifting backward half a step. Solomon stayed perfectly still. He inhaled, not to calm himself, but to stay anchored. "You need to walk away," he said. But Garvin didn't. Instead, his hand dropped to the front of his belt, not quite on his weapon, but close enough to send a message. That's when Creed stood again. No raised voice. No threats. Just movement, steady, deliberate as he stepped into the aisle. His body language said this now involved him. The gym wasn't fully silent, but it was close. The tension thick enough to bend the air. "If you lay a hand on him," Creed said clearly, "you'll answer to me." Garvin turned slightly. "And who are you supposed to be?" Creed moved another step forward. "The man telling you this stops here." Near the stage, a school board member whispered urgently to the principal. An assistant principal started moving along the wall, speaking quickly into her radio. The staff was finally starting to realize this wouldn't resolve on its own. Across the gym, more men rose to their feet. No formation, no discussion. They didn't have to speak. It was instinct. Unity. Readiness. Now all 6 of them were standing. Garvin looked around and started to realize, this wasn't just a parent causing a fuss. These men were different. They didn't shuffle. They didn't shift nervously. Their presence landed like thunder before the storm. Creed inched closer. "You've got 2 options. Walk away, or see where this leads, and you won't like it." Mally's voice broke through, nervous now. "We should just step back." But Garvin didn't move. His pride wrestled with his instincts. Then Solomon spoke this time, not to Garvin but to Creed. "Don't waste your breath." He made his choice. Creed's reply was quiet, serious. "Don't mistake silence for weakness." At last, Garvin stepped back. Not far. But enough. His hand dropped from his belt, his face flushed with heat. He knew. Outnumbered. Outmatched. That's when the principal finally reached them, whispering something firm but hushed. Whatever she said was enough. Garvin and Mally turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. Solomon released a slow, measured breath. Creed returned to his seat without a word. The others stayed standing. The pressure didn't lift, not completely. It hovered quiet and unresolved. Across the gym, Tyron Drayton had watched everything unfold. He stood in the graduation lineup, flanked by a girl with bold, beaded braids and a boy whose robe kept slipping off his shoulders. They tried to stay focused, laughing nervously, checking their name cards like nothing was happening. But Tyron couldn't pretend. He'd seen the guards start toward his father the moment the anthem ended. At first, he tried to believe it was just routine, maybe someone had the wrong seat. But something in his chest tightened. He knew better. He saw the way his father sat, rigid, composed, but locked in. He recognized that look. It was the same one he'd seen years ago, when he came home crying after being called something cruel at school. His dad hadn't raised his voice then, either. He'd just gone still like a blade held in restraint. Now, from his spot in line, Tyron kept watching. He couldn't hear what was being said. But Tyron didn't need to hear the words to understand what was happening. The way the guards stood too close, the way his father stayed seated with calm resolve, it all told him enough. And then, someone stood. A tall man in a dark coat. Tyron didn't know him, but something about the way he moved, how he placed himself squarely between the guards and his father's row, it said everything. This man wasn't just a bystander. He knew Solomon Drayton. He was there for him. Then another man stood. And another. There wasn't any shouting. No chaos. But the air changed. Like a quiet charge humming through the gym. People started paying attention. The crowd might not have known why, but they could feel it. Something had shifted. Tyron's heart beat harder. Not out of fear, but something deeper. A churn of pride and fire. He had grown up with bits and pieces of his dad's military past, not the painful parts. His father rarely spoke of those, but the little glimpses, a scar with no clear story, a friend who sent holiday cards from across the world, a box in the garage marked Kandahar that was never opened. He'd never met the men from those stories. Never even seen their faces. Until now. They weren't myths anymore. They were standing. Right here. Not because they had to. Because they chose to. As if they had never stopped having Solomon's back. Tyron blinked hard, trying to push down the sting in his eyes. Not now. Not here. He wasn't about to cry in front of everyone. The line moved forward again. A few names were called. Applause resumed, soft at first, like someone had hit a play button again. But the energy had changed. The banners and balloons didn't matter anymore. The moment had become something else. A school official tapped Tyron gently on the shoulder and said something. He nodded, not really hearing her. A classmate leaned over, whispered, "That your dad?" Tyron didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone in the gym knew now. They'd seen it with their own eyes. What kind of man his father truly was. Across the room, Creed remained standing. He wasn't scanning for praise. He wasn't posturing. His eyes were still on Solomon, seated calmly, hands folded in his lap, gaze steady on the stage like nothing had happened. But something had. The other men remained on their feet too. Not performing. Just present. Their silence said more than any speech ever could. The applause after each name grew louder now. It wasn't just routine anymore. Some parents stood, others wiped at their eyes, uncertain why they were moved but sure that they had just witnessed something important. Solomon didn't move. He wasn't trying to make a point. He was simply there. A father. Focused, still, unwavering. Waiting for his son's name. Tyron's name approached. The line moved faster. A few students adjusted their caps, laughed under their breath, caught up in the celebration. But Tyron's head wasn't there anymore. His thoughts kept circling back to his dad, sitting in quiet dignity, to the men who had risen without needing to be asked. He suddenly understood the weight his father had carried all these years. Sure, he'd seen the medals in the box. The folded flag on the bookshelf. But those things had always been still, silent, symbols. Today, they stood. Today, they moved. He was 3 people away from the stage now. He wiped his sweaty palms against his gown and exhaled slowly. The girl in front of him turned around, smiled nervously. "You ready?" Tyron gave a small grin. "More than you know." He stepped forward. On the other side of the gym, Solomon leaned in slightly, eyes locked onto the stage. He didn't clap for every student, not out of disrespect, but because he was focused entirely on one. The boy in the black gown, trimmed in red and white cords. The one whose smile looked just like his mother's. Another name. Then another. The announcer paused, cleared her throat. Then, she said it with purpose, with weight. Tyron Drayton. The name echoed. And for half a second, the gym held its breath. Then it erupted. Cheers. Whistles. Applause that swelled like thunder. But it wasn't the volume that stood out, it was the intention. The rhythm. Unified. Purposeful. Respectful. The 6 men who had remained standing raised their hands and clapped in perfect sync. Forceful. Not performative. A tribute without a salute. A message: we see you. We see your father. And we honor you both. Tyron walked the stage slowly, head high, heart pounding, not with nerves, but with pride. And not just pride in himself. It was pride in where he came from. In who raised him. He shook the principal's hand and turned toward the audience, searching for one face. He found him. Solomon didn't wave. Didn't stand. Just held his son's eyes and offered a small, knowing smile. Tyron nodded once and stepped off the stage. The applause continued. Some parents were standing now, some wiping their eyes. They didn't know all the details. But they knew this moment mattered. Solomon finally leaned back, letting the moment settle into his bones. He wasn't the kind of man to cry in public, but something in him gave way. Not sorrow. Not regret. Just release. The final names were called. 20 minutes later, the graduates tossed their caps high into the gym's air. Shouts filled the space. Cameras flashed. Balloons bobbed above the crowd like confetti. Students poured out of the double doors toward the back parking lot. Solomon didn't rush. He sat in the middle of it all, taking in the laughter, the music, the gleam of silver tassels and bright red gowns swirling past him. His eyes followed Tyron until he disappeared into the hallway. A teacher gave him a high five. Another one pulled him in for a half hug. But even in the chaos, Tyron turned just once and looked back. Solomon caught it. A single glance. "Did you see me?" Solomon's quiet expression answered, "Every second." The gym slowly emptied. Families shuffled out with bouquets and congratulations ringing in their voices. Solomon finally stood, stretching stiff legs from sitting so long. Creed walked over as the room cleared. He didn't speak right away. Just glanced at Solomon, then toward the doors. "You all right?" Creed asked finally. Solomon nodded. "I've seen worse." Creed gave a small smile. Yeah. But it still shouldn't have happened. No, Solomon agreed. It shouldn't have. Javier Meeks joined them now. We tried to stay out of the spotlight, he said, but when that guy moved his hand. Solomon raised a hand gently, stopping him. You all did what needed to be done. That was enough. They stood there in silence for a moment, letting the last of the noise fade. Then Solomon said, I want to see my son. Outside, the sun beat down on the pavement, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Students gathered in small groups, taking selfies, hugging family, reliving moments. Tyron stood near the flagpole, gown half unzipped, diploma folder in one hand, phone in the other. When he saw Solomon walking toward him, he stopped mid-sentence. The world around him faded. They met halfway. Tyron spoke first. You okay? Solomon nodded. You? Yeah, Tyron said, then looked down. They tried to move you. I know. Tyron's jaw clenched. I was ready to walk off that stage. I swear. 2 seconds away from saying something. Solomon placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. And that's why you didn't? Tyron looked up, confused. What do you mean? Because you trusted me to handle it. And because you handled your moment like a man. You didn't let anyone take it from you. Tyron held his breath. Then asked, who were those men, the ones who stood? Solomon glanced over his shoulder. The 6 former SEALs were now outside too, standing near the gym doors in a quiet circle. They weren't posturing or making a scene, just watching, steady and alert, like they always had each other's backs. They're brothers, Solomon said, his voice low but firm, men who've seen the worst and stayed true. Men who never forget what loyalty means. Tyron nodded slowly, the weight of it all settling in his chest. That was powerful. It was necessary, Solomon replied. Sometimes silence says more than shouting ever could. And sometimes, just standing up speaks louder than any speech. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Tyron cracked a smile. So, you gonna tell me those stories now? Solomon chuckled, the sound soft but real. Some of them. You're old enough for the truth now. They stood side by side, not just as father and son, but as 2 men connected by something deeper than blood, something lived, not explained. Across the lot, Creed lifted a hand. Not a wave. A gesture. A sign of respect. Tyron returned it, sure and strong. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them. But for the Drayton men, time was moving differently now. Still, one moment remained. By the time they walked back to the parking lot, most of the crowd had cleared. A few families lingered, laughing by open trunks, loading flowers and cards. The noise had faded to a low hum, and the sun dipped into late afternoon. Solomon unlocked the black Charger, the same car his wife used to drive to school events and weekend errands. Tyron paused at the passenger door, his hand brushing a scratch in the paint. She would be been screaming the loudest today, he said quietly. Solomon smiled gently. And she would be made you retake every picture until your smile was perfect. They climbed in. The warmth inside the car wrapped around them like a bubble, separate from the world outside. After a breath, Tyron turned toward his father. Why didn't you say anything to those guards, he asked. You just sat there. Solomon tapped the steering wheel once. Then turned to look at him. Because I don't need to raise my voice to prove who I am. And I don't need to argue to be heard. Tyron looked away for a moment, letting that settle. There've been 100 times in my life, Solomon continued, where I had to choose react in anger or stand in peace. That moment today, that wasn't the first time someone disrespected me. But how we respond, that's what people remember. But they humiliated you, Tyron said, his voice low. In front of everyone. Yes, Solomon replied calmly. And everyone saw it? But they also saw something else. They saw 6 men, who had no reason to be there, stand up. Not because I asked them to. Because they knew what was right. Tyron sat in silence. Solomon reached into his coat and pulled out an old photo, faded, folded, and deeply familiar. It was Tyron as a baby, curled in his mother's arms. I carried this through deployments, through losing her, through today. Not because I needed strength but because it reminded me what mattered. Tyron's voice dropped. You always knew who had your back. I didn't need to know, Solomon said. I just had faith. Real men don't vanish when things get hard, they show up. They stand. A long pause passed before Tyron spoke again. I want to be like that, like you. Solomon smiled. You already are. You walked across that stage with your head high. You didn't let them take that moment from you. You stayed grounded when everything around you wanted to knock you off balance. Outside the car, the last of the SEALs were heading out. Creed glanced back once toward the Charger. No words, just a look. Solomon returned the nod. No fanfare. Just truth. Tyron leaned back into the seat. So, what now? Solomon turned the key. The engine growled to life. Now we go home. And you get to pick dinner. Tyron grinned. Waffle House. Solomon laughed. Of course. They pulled out of the lot, the school slowly vanishing in the rearview mirror, but what happened in that gym wasn't going anywhere. Not for the people who saw it. Not for the boy who lived it. For Tyron, that day wasn't just about a diploma. It was about understanding that manhood isn't about loud words or big gestures. It's about how you carry yourself, especially when no one's watching. Some people shout to be noticed. Others sit in quiet strength and are never forgotten.